United States profile. A short history of U.S. 1565 First permanent European settlement in North America. St. Augustine, present-day Florida, founded by the Spanish. North America is already inhabited by several distinct groups of people, who go into decline following the arrival of settlers. 1607 Jamestown, Virginia, founded by English settlers, who began growing tobacco. 1620 Plymouth Colony, near Cape Cod, is founded by the Pilgrim Fathers, whose example is followed by other English Puritans in New England. 17th–18th centuries. Hundreds of thousands of Africans brought over and sold into slavery to work on cotton and tobacco plantations. 1763 Britain gains control of territory up to the Mississippi River following victory over France and 7 Years' War. War of Independence. 1774 colonists form First Continental Congress as Britain closes down Boston Harbor and deploys troops in Massachusetts. 1775 American Revolution. George Washington leads Continental Army to fight against British rule. 1776 The 4th of July Declaration of Independence endorsed by Congress. Colonies declare independence. 1781 Rebel states form loose confederation after defeating the British at the Battle of Yorktown. 1783 Britain accepts loss of colonies by virtue of Treaty of Paris. 1787 Founding Fathers draw up new Constitution for United States of America. Constitution comes into effect in 1788. 1789 George Washington elected first President of USA. 1791 Bill of Rights guarantees individual freedom. 1803 France sells Louisiana territories to USA. 1812–15 War of 1812 between the U.S. and Britain, partly over the effects of British restrictions on U.S. trade during the Napoleonic Wars. 19th century residual resistance by indigenous people crushed as immigration from Europe assumes mass proportions, with settlers moving westwards and claiming manifest destiny to control North America. Number of states in the Union rises from 17 to 45. 1846 to 48 U.S. acquires vast tracts of Mexican territory in wake of Mexican War including California and New Mexico. Civil War. 1854 Opponents of slavery, or abolitionists, set up Republican Party. 1860 Republican candidate Abraham Lincoln elected president. 1860–61 11 pro-slavery Southern states secede from Union and form Confederate States of America, triggering civil war with abolitionist Northern states. 1863 Lincoln issues Emancipation Proclamation, declaring slaves and Confederate states to be free. 1865 Confederates defeated. Slavery abolished under 13th Amendment. Lincoln is assassinated. 1898 U.S. gains Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines and Cuba following the Spanish-American War. U.S. annexes Hawaii. World War I and the Great Depression. 1917–18 U.S. intervenes in World War I, but rejects membership of League of Nations in its aftermath. 1920 Women given the right to vote under the 19th Amendment. 1920 Sale and manufacture of alcoholic liquor outlawed. The Prohibition era sees a mushrooming of illegal drinking joints, home-produced alcohol and gangsterism. 1924 Congress gives indigenous people right to citizenship. 1929–33 More than 13 million people are unemployed after the Wall Street stock market crash of 1929 triggers the Great Depression. President Herbert Hoover rejects direct federal relief. 1933 President Franklin D. Roosevelt launches New Deal recovery program which includes major public works. Sale of alcohol resumes. World War II and the Cold War. 1941 Japanese warplanes attack U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, leading to us joining World War II against the Axis powers. 1945 U.S. drops 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrenders. 1947 U.S. enunciates policy of aid for nations it deems threatened by communism and what became known as the Truman Doctrine. Cold War with Soviet Union begins. 1948 America's program to revive ailing post-war European economies. The Marshall Plan comes into force. Some $13 billion is dispersed over 4 years and the plan is regarded as a success. 1950–54 Senator Joseph McCarthy carries out a crusade against alleged communists in government and public life. The campaign and its methods become known as McCarthyism. In 1954, McCarthy is formally censured by the Senate. 1950–53 U.S. forces play leading role against North Korean and Chinese troops in Korean War. Desegregation and the Vietnam War. 1954 Racial segregation in schools becomes unconstitutional. Start of campaign of civil disobedience to secure civil rights for Americans of African descent. 1960 Democratic Party candidate John F. Kennedy elected president, narrowly defeating his rival Richard Nixon. 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion, an unsuccessful attempt to invade Cuba by Cuban exiles, organized and financed by Washington. 1962 U.S. compels Soviet Union to withdraw nuclear weapons from Cuba in what has become known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. 1963 President John F. Kennedy assassinated. Lyndon Johnson becomes president. 1964 U.S. steps up its military intervention in Vietnam. Civil Rights Act signed into law. It aims to halt discrimination on grounds of race, color, religion, nationality. 1968 Black civil rights leader Martin Luther King assassinated. 1969 Republican Party candidate Richard Nixon elected president amid growing public opposition to Vietnam War. U.S. military presence in Vietnam exceeds 500,000 personnel. U.S. astronaut Neil Armstrong becomes the first person to walk on the moon. 1972 Nixon re-elected and makes historic visit to China that leads to recognition of the communist government. 1973 Vietnam ceasefire agreement signed. The campaign had claimed some 58,000 American lives. 1974 President Nixon resigns in the Watergate scandal over a 1972 break-in at the Democratic Party headquarters. 1976 Democratic Party candidate Jimmy Carter elected president. 1979 U.S. Embassy in Tehran, Iran, seized by radical students. The 444-day hostage crisis, including a failed rescue attempt in 1980, impacts on President Carter's popularity and dominates the 1980 presidential election campaign. Global assertiveness. 1980 November Republican Party's Ronald Reagan elected president, and goes on to adopt a tough anti-communist policy abroad and tax-cutting policies at home. 1986 January Space Shuttle Challenger explodes shortly after takeoff from Cape Canaveral. All 7 crew members are killed. Manned space flights are suspended until September 1988. 1986 U.S. warplanes bomb Libyan cities. Irangate scandal uncovered, revealing that proceeds from secret U.S. arms sales to Iran were used illegally to fund Contra rebels in Nicaragua. 1988 Reagan's vice president, George Bush, elected president. 1989 U.S. troops invade Panama, oust its government and arrest its leader, one-time Central Intelligence Agency informant General Manuel Noriega, on drug trafficking charges. 1991 U.S. forces play dominant role in war against Iraq, which was triggered by Iraq's invasion of Kuwait and ended with the expulsion of Iraqi troops from that country. The Clinton years. 1992 Democratic Party candidate Bill Clinton elected president. 1992 Congress passes North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, intended to create free trade bloc among U.S., Canada and Mexico. 1995 Oklahoma bomb by far-right activists kills more than 160 people and worst ever incident of its kind in U.S. 1998 scandal over Clinton's sexual impropriety with White House worker Monica Lewinsky dominates domestic political agenda, and leads to impeachment proceedings in Congress. 1999 March-June U.S. plays leading role in NATO bombardment of Yugoslavia in response to Serb violence against ethnic Albanians in the province of Kosovo. 2000 November Republican Party's George W. Bush wins presidency. The 11th of September attacks. 2001 The 11th of September coordinated suicide attacks by Al-Qaeda terror group prompts the U.S. to embark on a war on terror that includes invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. 2001 October U.S. leads massive campaign of airstrikes against Afghanistan and helps opposition forces defeat the Taliban regime. 2002 November President Bush signs into law a bill creating the Department of Homeland Security, the biggest reorganization of federal government in more than 50 years. 2003 February Space Shuttle Columbia's 28th mission ends in tragedy when the craft breaks up while re-entering the atmosphere. The 7 astronauts on board are killed. Iraq War. 2003 March missile attacks on Baghdad marked the start of a U.S.-led campaign to topple the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. U.S. forces advance into central Baghdad in early April. 2004 May furor over pictures showing the abuse of Iraqi prisoners in U.S. custody. 2005 August Hundreds of people are killed when Hurricane Katrina, the most destructive storm to hit the U.S. in decades, sweeps through Gulf Coast states. Much of the city of New Orleans is submerged by floodwaters. 2006 March Congress renews the USA Patriot Act, a centerpiece of the government's fight against terrorism, after months of debate about its impact on civil liberties. The government agrees to some curbs on information gathering. 2007 January President Bush announces a new Iraq strategy. Thousands more U.S. troops will be dispatched to shore up security in Baghdad. 2008 September turmoil in the U.S. and international financial markets as major Wall Street investment bank Lehman Brothers collapses and other big U.S. financial players face growing troubles as a result of the credit crunch. Obama elected. 2008 November Democratic Senator Barack Obama becomes the first black president of the United States. 2009 January 1 Tea Party rally held in protest at Obama administration's plans to bail out banks and introduce health care reform. The populist and libertarian movement acts as focus for conservative opposition to the president's reform plans. 2010 March Democrats in Congress succeed in passing a bill on health care reform, despite strong Republican opposition. U.S. and Russia announce agreement on a new nuclear arms reduction treaty to replace the 1991 Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. The pact was to be signed on the 8th of April. President Obama unveils a new defense policy significantly curtailing the circumstances in which the U.S. would use nuclear weapons. 2011 May U.S. forces kill al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden in an operation in the Pakistani city of Abbottabad. 2011 July The final space shuttle mission is completed with the landing of Atlantis on the 21st of July, bringing about the end of the 30-year program. 2012 September The U.S. ambassador in Libya is killed when armed men storm the consulate in Benghazi. 2013 April Twin bomb blasts targeting the Boston Marathon kill 3 people and injure more than 170. Soviet-born Islamic extremist Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is charged after a manhunt in which his elder brother and suspected co-conspirator Tamerlan is killed. 2013 May Former National Security Agency (NSA) contractor Edward Snowden flees to Russia via Hong Kong after revealing leaking information on extensive internet and telephone surveillance by U.S. intelligence. 2014 August-November The shooting of an unarmed black teenager by a white policeman sparks weeks of riots in the Missouri town of Ferguson. In November, a grand jury's decision not to charge the officer with murder sets off new unrest. Republican resurgence. 2014 November Republicans win a Senate majority in midterm elections, gaining control of both houses of Congress and further reducing President Obama's room for maneuver. 2014 December U.S. and Cuba begin steps to normalize diplomatic relations after more than 50 years of standoff. 2015 March President Obama announces that 10,000 U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan as advisors and trainers until 2016. 2015 June U.S. accuses Chinese hackers of massive breach of personal data of nearly 4 million government workers. China denies any role. White supremacist shoots dead 9 African-American worshippers in a church in Charleston, prompting nationwide revulsion and demands for end to public display of Confederate Civil Warrior symbols. 2015 December FBI Muslim couple who shot dead 14 people and wounded 21 others at office party in San Bernardino, California, were Islamist extremists who had prepared the attack. The worst on U.S. soil since September 2001, in advance. Trump elected president. 2016 November Republican candidate Donald Trump wins presidential election, defeating Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton in one of the biggest political upsets in U.S. history. He is inaugurated in January. 2017 January President Trump signs executive orders restricting visas for people seeking to enter the U.S. from certain Muslim-majority countries, and barring funding for cities that shelter illegal immigrants. Both policies are blocked by the courts. 2017 May President Trump sacks FBI Director James Comey. prompting a public row about whether the White House was trying to derail an inquiry into alleged collusion between Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election and the Trump campaign. 2017 August. A woman is run over and killed by a suspected far-right sympathizer amid protests in Charlottesville, Virginia. President Trump is widely criticized for blaming both sides for violence, rather than the neo-Nazis and white supremacists. 2017 December. U.S. recognizes Jerusalem as capital of Israel and announces plans to move embassy there, prompting anger in Arab countries. North Korea diplomacy. 2018 April. China imposes 25% tariffs on a range of U.S. goods in response to similar U.S. measures. 2018 June. After months of hostile rhetoric, President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un meet in Singapore and agree to continue dialogue aimed at reducing tensions on the Korean peninsula. 2018 October. The U.S., Canada and Mexico reach a new trade deal to replace the current North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. The U.S. announces plans to withdraw from the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty, which restricts U.S. and Russian short- and medium-range nuclear missiles, accusing Moscow of having violated its terms. 2018 November. Opposition Democrats take control of House of Representatives in midterm elections, making it harder for President Trump's Republicans to pass legislation. 2018 December. Defense Secretary James Mattis resigns after President Trump announces plan to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria. 2019 February. U.S. and North Korea talks in Vietnam break down over pace of nuclear disarmament. 2019 March. Mueller report finds no evidence of collusion between Russian efforts to influence the 2016 election and the Trump campaign. President Trump recognizes Israeli sovereignty over Golan Heights, which Israel seized from Syria in the 1967 war and later annexed. The international community does not recognize Israeli sovereignty. Presented by News of Voice. More news, www.newsofvoice.com. Please subscribe to our channel. Appreciate all like and comments. Thank you.